Attention and intention are the mechanics of manifestation. Oh my God, I think I've been reading too much woo-woo nonsense. I'm Eric Vanman, and if you've watched any of my other videos on this channel, you'll know that I'm a great supporter of the notion that psychology is a science. Our findings, and therefore any applications that come from them, should be based on scientific research. And yet, psychology, like many other fields, is not immune to the guru effect. This term refers to the tendency of people to blindly follow the advice and teachings of a charismatic and authoritative figure, often without critically examining their claims or even their credentials. It may seem harmless to read books or watch people who are like this. They may even give us new perspectives in improving our own lives. But in this video, I will show you how this phenomenon can have serious consequences, leading people to adopt ineffective or even harmful practices in their pursuit of mental health and well-being. The guru effect is particularly pronounced in the self-help industry, which is worth billions of dollars annually. Many self-help gurus claim to have discovered the key to happiness and success and offer their advice in books, seminars, and other media. While some of this advice may be based on sound psychological principles, much of it is not supported by scientific evidence or is outright pseudo-scientific. This adoration of gurus in psychology has been around for centuries, in fact. For example, I posted here a video about Franz Anton Mesmer, who for a brief time in the early 1800s had Parisian society crazy for seances and magnets. Have you ever wondered why you often see phrenology heads like this in antique stores and other secondhand shops? Phrenology, this idea that bumps on your head indicate something about your brain underneath, was developed by Franz Gall in 1796, but these little figures, heads, always seem to have L. Fowler on them. You see, Gall and his colleague Spurzheim were anatomists, scientists, who were interested in conducting research on the connection between those bumps and personality and other cognitive traits. But it was two industrious and businesslike brothers in the United States, Orson and Lorenzo Fowler, who turned phrenology into something practical, and in the process became popular psychology gurus. They minimized the scientific content of phrenology and maximized the practical applications. They set up an office in New York where clients could have their characters read for a fee. They wrote endlessly of the benefits of phrenology and published a phrenological journal that endured from the 1840s to 1911. They traveled around the country, especially the frontier areas, giving lectures and challenging skeptics. They accepted any kind of test of their abilities, including blindfolded examinations of volunteers' skulls. Their phrenology pretended to tell employers what people to hire and to advise men which wives to take. Whereas Gall had believed the brain's faculties were set by heredity, the Fowlers, however, maintained that weak faculties could be improved by practice and overly strong ones could be controlled by efforts of will. Many people sought out advice from the Fowlers on how to lead their lives. They were the first guidance counselors. They also held out hope that the nation and the world could be improved if only every person could be phrenologized. Of course, no one today practices phrenology, at least the way the Fowlers popularized it. Since then, however, we've had plenty of other people who've come along to give us advice with vague connections to science. John Watson, the behaviorist, lost his job as a university professor in 1920 due to a scandal. But long after he was no longer doing scientific research, he was writing popular books about marriage and raising children. For example, in 1928, he published Psychological Care of Infant and Child. In this book, he said that parents need only to control their children's environments properly, so the most adaptive conditioned reflexes would develop. His book elaborated his theory of emotion and offered practical suggestions about how to avoid the creation of inappropriate conditioned emotional reactions. The home should be set up to minimize the occurrence of banging doors and other random loud sounds that would frighten the child and establish inappropriate fear reactions. Clothing should always be loose enough to allow free movements and prevent unnecessary rage. And above all, Watson recommended that children should never be stimulated into love responses when they ought to be developing self-reliant behavior. Nothing drew his scorn more than the coddling of children, which he saw as the rewarding of ineffective behavior with hugs and kisses. He wrote, "When I hear a mother say, 'Bless its little heart' when it falls down, stubs its toe, or suffers some other ill, I usually have to walk a block or two to let off steam. Never hug and kiss them. Never let them sit on your lap. If you must, kiss them once on the forehead when they say goodnight. Shake hands with them in the morning. Give them a pat on the head if they've made an extraordinarily good job of a difficult task." Now, of course, there have been dozens of others who've given advice, written books, gave seminars, and even TED Talks like this on the flimsiest of scientific evidence. A modern day example of this would be a self-help guru who's been criticized for promoting unscientific ideas, and that's Tony Robbins. Robbins is a motivational speaker and an author who has gained a large following for his self-help books and seminars, even though he has no formal training in psychology or any other related field. It's probably no surprise then that some psychologists have criticized his teachings, arguing that his teachings rely too heavily on anecdotal evidence and lack empirical support. For example, Robbins has been criticized for promoting the idea that people can manifest their desires through positive thinking without providing any scientific evidence to support this claim. Another example of the guru effect in psychology is the popularity of personality tests such as the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI. Despite lacking empirical support, the MBTI has become widely used in business and education settings, with many people basing important decisions on their results. However, psychologists have criticized the MBTI for its lack of reliability and validity, with some arguing that it's little more than just a fortune-telling device. More recently, academic psychologists like Jordan Peterson and Amy Cuddy, who both did quite a bit of good, solid scientific research at their universities before they left them, have put their toes into the guru pool. Peterson, for example, who left the University of Toronto, wrote the best-selling 12 Rules of Life, which gives plenty of sensible advice about living that's full of personal anecdotes and even a little Jungian psychology. But there's little scientific basis to most of what he writes. He now has a successful YouTube channel and makes a very comfortable living as a speaker about all sorts of topics. Cuddy, who was a professor at Rutgers and then at the Harvard Business School, is perhaps best known these days for her work on power poses. This all took off in 2010 when she and her co-authors published a paper that supposedly showed that adopting certain body postures associated with dominance and power for just as little as 2 minutes could increase your testosterone, decrease your cortisol, increase your appetite for risk, and cause better performance in job interviews. Particularly because of the physiological evidence that they reported, the study was widely picked up in the popular media. And soon Cuddy was giving a TED Talk in which she spoke about this remarkable effect of these poses, and she even repeated the findings having to do with cortisol and testosterone. However, subsequent research failed to replicate those physiological effects, and her co-author, Dana Carney, went so far as to admit that there had been a lot of statistical shenanigans in getting those effects when they reported them in 2010. Now, Cuddy and other labs have since then found that the effects of power posing do replicate for self-report measures. That is, if you stand, like for instance, with your hands over your head like you just won something, and then I ask you, how do you feel right now? You'll probably report that you feel more confident. But keep in mind that such findings could be largely due to demand characteristics. That is, I give maybe hints from my research to tell you perhaps what I'm hoping I'm going to find, and therefore you act in a way that fits with my expectations. I believe that if the original evidence of those physiological changes had replicated, it would be much more compelling to argue that power posing does something for the person. But that hasn't stopped Cuddy's career skyrocketing, and she now commands speaker fees at conferences and special seminars in the range of $50,000 to $100,000, as well as writing a best-selling book. People are hungry for a simple remedy to the challenges of everyday life. Cuddy's message is simple, that you can just pose powerfully for a couple of minutes, and it'll give you the confidence to face those challenges, and it's deeply appreciated by her followers. But the science underlying it is not very strong. So you might be saying at this point, what's the harm? So you read one of Peterson's books, or you watch Amy Cuddy give a seminar, or you see Tony Robbins say something motivating. It can only help, right? Well, here are at least 3 potential harms. First of all, money. People since the time of Mesmer and the Fowler brothers have given these psychology gurus a lot of money. Robbins can charge around $4,000 for one of his multi-day workshops. I know someone who spent a couple $100 just to see Amy Cuddy give one of her Power Pose seminars. And yes, people do have the right to spend or waste their money on whatever they want. It could be considered like a form of entertainment, but perhaps that money could be better spent on time with a therapist or a treatment that has a strong scientific basis instead. Secondly, people may be disadvantaged by the advice. When Watson gave advice to a whole generation of American parents that they shouldn't give their children affection, what happened to all of those kids? In Watson's case, his two younger boys had a miserable life, and one even ended up ending his own life when he was an adult. In the case of Tony Robbins' advice that what you need is positive thinking to manifest success, well, what about the person who actually lacks the talent or the resources to be successful despite their positive thinking? And third, the advice may mask other, more important problems. Amy Cuddy spent the first part of her career on very important research on stereotyping and prejudice, much of it even inspired by my own research in this area. She then went out and gave seminars to business leaders about her research, but it seemed to have had little effect on how these leaders were going to run their businesses. In Giradharadas' 2018 Winners Take All, he talks about the frustration that Cuddy had at this point, how her scientific research showing the harms of prejudice and discrimination in the workplace was just simply being ignored. So when the Power Pose thing took off, she was able to change her focus from these institutional problems to how an individual person could cope with these problems themselves by posing for a couple of minutes. It took this huge problem of racism and sexism and changed it into something that minorities and women could use to feel more empowered. Similarly, Jordan Peterson's approach has been largely focused not on the problems surrounding equality, but on how young men in particular have been suffering as leaders try to strive for more equality. The problem with advice from gurus like this then is that their followers may become focused on matters that are not really that important. In conclusion, psychology suffers from the guru effect. While there are many qualified and reputable psychologists who offer evidence-based advice and treatment, there are also many self-help gurus and other figures who promote unscientific or even harmful practices. It's important for individuals to critically examine the claims and credentials of anyone offering mental health advice and to seek out evidence-based treatments from qualified professionals. By doing so, we can avoid the pitfalls of the guru effect and ensure that we're taking care of our mental health in a responsible and effective way. So that's all I have in this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did like it, please give it a like and maybe even consider subscribing to my channel. Until the next time, stay curious.